Have you ever, on particularly lonely nights, ever thought about how you would create an anime game? Perhaps you'd make the main character a perfect version of yourself, give them a massive harem of women, and write that cliché indirect kiss scene that you've always dreamed of. Or, if you're Miraculo Island, maybe you thought that wasn't enough. No, you need to have every cliché, but you're gonna be the one to do it right. You're gonna be the one to make anime great again. Except you aren't. I played this game because there were boobs on the Steam page, and it only got worse from there.
Overall, I consider it a casual, family-friendly story.
I didn't go into Miraculo Island thinking it was going to be an absolute disaster. The marketing does a great job of covering up its flaws. I don't mean the trailer is good or anything, it just tactically doesn't show any gameplay or story. The only thing the store page really has that gets the consumer excited is the copious amounts of anime girls, and that works for people like me, but it definitely limits the reach the product could have. Regardless, when I saw the $10 price tag, my hopes were set very high, but upon beating the game twice, not only were they dashed, they were decimated beyond recognition. We'll get into all that later though, you can't go into a review on an empty stomach. To fill you up, let's explore the game a bit and see if we can find where that bikini scene happens. Miraculo Island starts by showing you a bunch of creepy text that I didn't pay attention to at all because I was eating chicken. As it turns out, that's the optimal way to play because none of it makes any sense. I went back and read it after beating the game and it's just a bunch of cryptic bullshit made even more confusing by the ending it's trying to foreshadow. At best, it just serves to assure the player that yes, this will indeed attempt to be a scary game. Cut to the most offensive thing I've ever seen.
Who the hell sleeps in jeans?
Nicholas does, and he then proceeds to do the second most offensive thing I've ever seen, which is vomiting exposition at me for 5 minutes straight.
Not the strongest first impression.
Nicholas has been in a coma for about a year, and to really round him out as a blank slate, he also has amnesia. He can't even remember if he had a girlfriend, although I think he's just using the amnesia to cope with that one. He's currently going through a free rehabilitation program that he really wants you to know he doesn't like in order to reintegrate into society. Okay, I can kinda understand the premise. Social withdrawal after a traumatic event is a growing issue in Japan. Mainly caused by anime girls just being the better option, hikikomori as they're known in Japan would probably react this way to forced social interaction. The game hasn't completely lost me just yet. Speaking of, this program has him spending 8 days on an island with other juvenile criminals. Wait, what? How does getting hit by a car make him a criminal? Is it because his thick and voluptuous ass damaged their car? That's not how property damage works. If anything, they caused property damage onto him. Why isn't Nicholas questioning this? Did amnesia take away his critical thinking skills too?
Also, I'm pretty sure that's not how amnesia works.
Yeah, but to be fair, no game knows how it works, so it can have a pass on this one, right? And wait a minute, this dude gets to spend 8 days on an island basically getting to do whatever he wants while surrounded by a bunch of anime tropes completely for free? Even if he is a weeb shut-in, any respectable weeb would immediately recognize that this makes him the main character and take full advantage of the situation and expand his harem. Anyways, even though he doesn't do that, this is still a pretty interesting hook. We've got an anime addict forced to socialize on an island we know is gonna turn evil. Murder is the best place for love to blossom, and if all goes well, my man Nicholas might even have a shot at impressing the ladies and getting friend-zoned, I think, which would still be a net positive considering he currently has no friends. Speaking of friends, let's go meet the other campers and see if we can figure out who's gonna be the murderer. What? That lovely hunk of anime was Franco, and he can pretty much be summed up as good guy who acts mean to trick the player. Same can be said for the next character we meet, Amber, who is literally just the girl version of Franco, but at least sorta has a reason to be that way, unlike this guy who I think just has schizophrenia because half the things he does make no sense. After Amber comes Cynthia, and the fact she doesn't immediately ostracize Nicholas for saying my lady should have his main character censors blasting. Cynthia is the generic naive lolly girl with a rich daddy, which again puts a wrench in the whole island of criminals thing. Nicholas actually does sort of notice this, but mostly ignores it because he possesses a singular brain cell in the form of his detective manga. Franco simps for Cynthia, which is basically the equivalent of liking Rei more than Asuka, and hell, he can have her. I prefer mentally ill tsunderes anyways. While Cynthia's telling us about the dream dream she had last night, she has some sort of mental breakdown, and we take the chance to escape to breakfast, leaving her defenseless and alone to be discovered by Franco as we meet our next contender for best girl, Janet. Janet is the only character in the story who actually acts somewhat normal. She's the only one Nicholas really has to confide in, which to the average Joe would make for an obvious twist villain. However, if you're observant like me, then you'd have noticed that Janet is portrayed as the villain in the game's cover art, which means she absolutely is not the villain. I actually guessed this while playing and was right. So while it may seem like I'm just stroking my own ego, that's really just a fortunate side effect of me being a genius. While the other campers mostly keep to themselves, like Sebastian, we haven't seen yet because he hardly leaves his room, Janet makes an effort to connect with those she can, and is even more of a motherly figure than the socially stunted supervisor. Her only drawback is that she probably wants to kill you, and actually almost does so with her cooking, but we'll cross that bridge when we get to it, and most are into that shit anyways. The last two characters are Sebastian and Miss Valerie. Sebastian is the stereotypical super smart nerd, and Valerie is a worse camp supervisor than a paraplegic pedophile. She's also a super genius and is suspiciously close to Sebastian. Maybe the pedophile joke was more accurate than intended. If you hadn't noticed yet, this game kinda has a lot of characters. Franco, Amber, Cynthia, Janet, Sebastian, Valerie, and you. For a max 10-hour game, that's a lot of characters to develop. I wonder if the game's gonna manage to do it. In accordance with Rule 1, after breakfast, the gang meets up and we're given our task for the day. You'd assume it's gonna be some kind of chore like cutting wood or something, but all we're told to do is go explore. Sebastian even manages to convince Valerie that he should be allowed to explore his room, and since no one else is allowed to do that, I have to just assume that Valerie is madly in love with him. Either that or they're both evil. We're half an hour in and it's already pretty obvious. Anyways, the gang all teleport to various parts of the island because there's no way they could walk as far as they do in the time provided unless Nicholas literally idled in place for 30 minutes straight, or the island is the size of a children's toy. Nicholas then makes the mistake of needing to progress the plot and gets roped into delivering lunches to everyone else. He also makes one of the worst fourth wall breaks I've ever seen. Now, the Steam page describes the narrative style of Miraculo Island as innovative, but I don't think anyone actually knows what that word means. In the case of Miraculo Island, my best guess is that innovative means they added a little walking and some short mini-games to what is otherwise entirely a visual novel. To me, innovative means you've created something new or unique, but neither of these things are anything new. Walking around and doing puzzles in an otherwise visual novel game has been around for a long time. Hell, I did it in my game, which was released almost exactly a year before Miraculo Island. Am I allowed to call my game innovative too? No, I can't, because it isn't. My game's narrative style was just another game's narrative style, but with my story and puzzles. If you relax the definition of innovative a lot, I guess it could fit, but it also feels a little dishonest. I mean, Miraculo Island is pretty much just the first day repeated every day. You walk to a part of the island, talk to a character, and then walk to another part with a few mini-games sprinkled in. It certainly didn't feel innovative, but if you have any idea how it is, please tell me in the comments. Basically, what the game is trying to do is set up interactions between characters and then give you the option to screw things up, but there's something very vital that the game doesn't understand. Let's look at Sebastian. Your first impression of him is that he's a smart recluse who gets special treatment from Valerie. When you deliver him lunch, you very uncomfortably suggest that he was masturbating in his room, and then he starts talking about unsolved math problems. The next time you talk, you ask him why he referred to Valerie as professor, and then the last time you talk, you see him yet again getting special treatment from Valerie, getting out of having to do the test of courage that is in every slice of life anime ever. He's also then in the woods anyways for some reason and gets beat up by Franco. The reason I told you all this is because after only these few interactions, you have to make a choice that decides whether or not you can actually win the game. Sebastian drops his compass upon returning home from his Franco beating, and you get the choice to return it or not. Now, Sebastian has acted suspiciously this entire time. His special treatment from Valerie and how he separates himself from the group even more so than Amber makes him the most likely villain. He doesn't necessarily seem evil, but you have no reason to really trust him. He never comes searching for his compass, so there aren't any obvious consequences if you don't return it. What do you do? Well, if you don't return it, it's impossible to get either the normal or true ending. You have to ignore any and all suspicion that's been building around him and just be a nice guy. Maybe at this point in the game world, Nicholas has no reason to distrust Sebastian and would simply return the compass, but the player player knows the game isn't just a happy slice-of-life anime game. The actions the game wants the player to take goes against what the player expects of the game. In my case, this caused me to keep the compass, thinking it would come in handy down the line, and then simply being shit out of luck when I couldn't finish the game. This is how nearly every choice works. You need to always be the nice guy, or else that character will kill you or screw you over at some point down the line. This means the choices aren't really choices. You're railroaded into a set path, and even worse, that path goes against what the player expects of a horror mystery game. Everyone is actually the good guy? The only way to beat the game is to ignore the start and every preconceived notion you have about it, but that's pretty much impossible. The developer did say that they would reduce the harshness of these choices so you could still get the actual ending, but it's this kind of choice itself and everything built around it that's the problem.
This is definitely a tricky thing to consider while you're making a game, but you have to understand that most players are gonna at least subconsciously metagame or use outside information in order to beat the game.
They have preconceived notions that change how they interact with the product, and this is why marketing is super important. Anyways, that's enough about Sebastian and enough deconstructing the game. Let's get back to the real reason you're all here. Me. After you deliver lunch to Sebastian, you head out to Franco, with whom you have one of the most awkward and confusing interactions I've ever seen. You start by being scared of him and having the choice to either throw the lunch at him or slowly approaching him from behind. I chose the latter and immediately regretted it as he turned around thinking I was there to kill him. I proclaim my innocence, calling him sir to assert his alpha position and make him more comfortable. He forgives me and then tells me how he loves the sea and asks me to join his crew. Flustered and confused, I indirectly accept and am then told to leave. I'm gonna just pretend this never happened because I've never felt so much like a beta male, nor do I understand why these characters have this dynamic, as Franco hasn't necessarily done anything to Nicholas yet. It feels kinda like Nicholas is scared of Franco just to mislead the player into thinking Franco is evil. After Franco, we go to deliver lunch to Cynthia, who just planted some watermelon seeds. Nicholas doesn't think they'll grow, but he doesn't tell her that because he wouldn't tell a kid that Santa isn't real. Yep, we're really driving home the fact that she's a loli. You get the choice to pour some water on her watermelon, which is presented super dramatically for some reason, and then you leave. 2 more to go. Next up is Amber, and for a guy who is trying to suck up to everyone, Nicholas is an absolutely insufferable asshole to Amber in this scene. I mean, she is being pretty unsociable, but Nicholas just straight up says to her face that he wishes she was more like Cynthia and that we live in a society. I don't think that a worse possible combination of words to say to a woman exists on this planet. Nicholas is rightfully yelled at, so he leaves. Finally, we arrive at Janet. Walking into the forest, we pick up an apple underneath a tree when suddenly we are crushed by Janet's thick ass and thighs. Just kidding, she is actually very reasonably proportioned, which actually surprised me. This is an anime game after all. Anyways, her and Nicholas exchange one of the worst attempts at flirting ever documented. It's like an alien tried to write an endearing anime flirting scene, put the script through Google Translate 4 times, and then had a seizure when trying to put it into the game. Janet invites Nicholas to eat lunch with her, which he interprets as bullying, yet complies anyways. She says some cryptic bullshit. They share an indirect kiss because Nicholas dumped out all his water onto Cynthia's melons and the game wouldn't let me refill it. A lucky oversight. And finally, they have more awkwardly written awkward conversation and Nicholas runs away to the beach like the beach he is. At the beach, he runs into Franco, who has found a massive shipwreck. Nicholas thinks this means they're being invaded by pirates, and I can't tell if he's joking or is just otherworldly amounts of stupid. Franco uses his alpha male powers to convince Nicholas to search for treasure on the beach with him, and as evening rolls in and they find nothing, I realize that Franco is just as dumb as Nicholas. Except neither of them are really that dumb, so this scene doesn't make a ton of sense. On his way back home, Nicholas bumps into Cynthia, who's still hanging out with her melon seeds. She asks whether plants feel pain, and while it's really just more establishing her as the wholesome, naive loli and Nicholas being a simp, it shows that Nicholas can understand her perspective and he comforts her as she talks down to herself. He's helping her build confidence in herself, something that actually does affect the game later on. This is without a doubt the best scene yet, even if it is pretty basic. You head back home, and on the way, Franco chucks a ball at Nicholas's head, which you actually get the choice to be hit by or not for some reason. I chose hit by because I figured it was more in character, but Nicholas has a force field or something and it bounces off and knocks out Cindy. Nicholas then coaxes Franco into attempting sexual assault.
The actions of both Nicholas and Franco are completely unhinged and psychopathic. They play off their criminal actions as a harmless prank between brothers, and the game moves so quickly past the severity of the scene that the player is manipulated into believing nothing illegal happened. To ignore this scene is probably for the best, as it completely destroys the morality of these characters and makes many of their future actions incredibly creepy and disturbing. I doubt this was the developer's intent, so ignoring it is what we'll do, but understand that this scene is in no way endearing or entertaining.
Luckily, Cindy wakes up before anything happens. Franco smacks the shit out of Nicholas, which is fair, although he did agree to it, and finally everyone is back home. You have the option to apologize to Amber, which, like the Sebastian choice later on, will affect what ending you can get, although here most everyone will choose to be nice because Nicholas actually was a dick, so it makes sense. Nicholas then spends the rest of the evening reading his signature detective manga. Or does he? Actually, this is the day that never ends, because it's time to go do the aforementioned test of courage. You play rock, paper, scissors to decide who goes with who, and you actually do get put with different people. I checked after my first partner got me into an unfortunate incident involving a cliff. You have different conversations depending on who you're with, which I think is pretty cool. I went through it fully with Amber, and in hers, Nicholas attempts to beat the shit out of a dog for no reason, while Amber beats the shit out of him. Women, am I right? You follow the dog and find this spooky cave. Ignore it because you're role-playing as Nicholas and he's a pussy, and since the dog ran away, you continue on your search for the outpost, which I forgot to mention you were trying to find. When you do eventually find it first, since you're the protagonist, you go in alone because Amber is scared. Someone call a doctor! Amber's suffering from acute cliché disease! Inside, you find a picture of a pretty old couple and their dog, which is heavily insinuated to be the dog you just ran into, which is pretty creepy, but it's never expanded upon at all, so it's just kinda creepy for the sake of being creepy. You grab some proof you found the place and head back home for a shower. In the shower, Nicholas questions the activities they did today, wondering why things aren't as strict as he had originally thought they'd be. This means Nicholas knows less about the situation than we initially assumed, and makes the opening exposition seem more like he's a spoiled kid jumping to conclusions. This makes the game a little harder to criticize, because you could explain away the cringy interactions as Nicholas being emotionally and socially stunted due to his coma, instead of just a developer trying to emulate things they saw in anime with no thought whatsoever. However, Nicholas does show sporadic moments of maturity, and the constant grammatical errors makes me think I'm just reading into it too much and giving the dev too much credit. Anyways, Nicholas gives a quick overview of each of the characters' surface level traits and pretty much foreshadows the entire rest of the game. He hops out of the shower, grabs Sebastian's compass, and finally, day one comes to a close.
Making that part of the video took 2 fucking weeks. This video's never gonna get done if I keep going at the pace I have been, so from now on I'm gonna be speedrunning this shit harder than a stillborn baby speedruns life.
Day 2 starts with Janet waking you up by shoving her tits in your face. After you refuse to get out of bed, she makes this sound, which was so cringe I stopped the recording a minute later and flew to Europe so I could legally drown my sorrows in alcohol. After some more awkward banter, you leave to take a shit, but unfortunately for you, Franco is stupid and didn't lock the door, which means in true anime fashion, you are now thrown into a tree. This whole sequence just reminds me how weird and awkward anime is when taken out of anime. Alright, ignore all of that, it was just filler. The day actually starts with Amber bullying the shit out of Cynthia, which, I mean, based Amber? Valerie then gives us the activity for the day, which is, drumroll please, swimming. Hey, look at that, we found it! Luckily, the booba is counteracted with more cringe, so I don't accidentally start liking the game or anything. Besides the booba and the cringe, Amber bullies Cynthia more, you bully Amber more, and Franco bullies you more, except it's not actual bullying. For example, Nicholas pushes Amber into the water after she says she doesn't like water and goes, haha, I peed there. Amber responds with, ew, gross, and Nicholas says, ha, lol, I didn't actually though, but hey, now you're not scared of water, and then she just accepts it. It's just really cheap, awkward, and overly dramatic character development. Also, you almost die. Nicholas gets the option of competing in a swimming race with Janet, and no matter how good you do, he gets a cramp towards the end and begins to drown. His self-monologue while he's drowning mocks the player for picking the option to race because no way he could win while still injured from the accident. But to be honest, either the game didn't tell me he was still injured or I just forgot because that thought didn't even cross my mind. You do get some babes to cry over you though, so all in all, worth. That's about it for the pond. Cynthia loses loses her stuffed bear and you spend the rest of the day looking for it, which kinda kills the mood. You never find it, and Cynthia has to smoke a lot of copium to deal with it, but Valerie doesn't give a fuck and you move on to the next activity. The next activity is extremely lame. It's just everyone talking about their feelings and what they wish for in the future. Ugh, as a man who bottles up all his emotions, I can't relate to this scene at all. Actually, it's not so bad. Amber continues being based by saying money is the greatest thing anyone can have while everyone else whines about some greater purpose or finding love or other dumb shit. Basically, even though the writing is jank and it doesn't really add much to the characters, this scene is good because it solidifies Amber as best girl. After you put the wishes in a bottle and send them out to sea, Valerie tells everyone the story of the island. Basically, a bunch of miners got greedy during the gold rush and pissed off the shaman of the island, who then cursed the island, which resulted in a monster killing everyone. This is now the second game I've reviewed to have a plot based around a gold rush. Send me more if you find them. Everyone gets freaked out by the story and heads home, but Nicholas just can't help being the protagonist. Using his vast knowledge acquired through years of studying detective manga, he deduces that Amber must have stolen Cynthia's stuffed bear, so he goes up to her room to confront her. He tries to gaslight Amber into giving back the bear, and since she doesn't know how to deviate from her tsundere script, he leaves thinking his assumption was correct even though she doesn't give it back. Walking back to his room, he runs into Franco, who somehow overheard the conversation even though he was all the way downstairs. Franco white knights for her, threatening to beat Nicholas up if he keeps toying with other people's emotions. Nicholas, being just as confused as I am by what he means, wimps out of the conversation and falls asleep. End day 2. Day 3, we keep the train rolling. Nicholas is awoken at 2 a.m. by Janet to go look at the stars. It's pretty wholesome, so I want to take the opportunity to point out that the face graphics don't fit inside the space provided. Nicholas falls asleep looking at the stars and eventually wakes back up and returns to the cabin with Janet. He goes to his bed to sleep again, and the only takeaway you really need from the whole scene is that Nicholas likes Janet more now. As soon as he falls asleep, the game's trailer plays for some reason. I think it's to build dramatic suspense because what happens immediately after is Janet rushing into your room saying Valerie is gone, but I was so beyond confused that all the suspense just dissipated. It doesn't even make sense as a trailer or in the game. It's just art and words that don't mean anything. I mean, this last sentence ties into the twist at the end, but it's a really dumb twist, so I refuse to acknowledge it. I'm gonna just ignore this and hope the dev can explain it because I don't know why it's here or what these words mean. Anyways, Janet calls a group meeting to discuss Valerie's disappearance and nobody gives a single shit. Everyone assumes she'll be back or that this is today's activity, so they just go off and do their own thing. Even Nicholas just gets Cynthia a plate of cheese from the basement and plays Battleship with Sebastian and Franco without a care in the world. To be honest though, no matter what he does, his character is hypocritical. He's first shown as a shut-in weeb loser, so ignoring potential problems would be in character, but at the same time, he's shown to be competent and caring, so him being concerned and helping would also be in character. These two traits are totally opposed to each other, so we're in a bit of a dilemma here. I'll talk more about his character later though. For now, just know that I spent way too long beating Franco in Battleship, and after screwing around and napping a bit, Nicholas eventually does go out to search for Valerie. All he finds is a bracelet on the beach, and by the time he gets back, it's about time for bed. We get a sweet montage of Nicholas just being a dude, stumble upon Sebastian being a little sus, and then the day ends. Sweet, that was like a 30-minute day. My paycheck from YouTube draws near. Day 4 starts with Nicholas and the gang discovering that literally all of their food has been stolen. Against all odds and the rules of science, Nicholas develops another brain cell and questions Sebastian, who we know was up late last night. But Sebastian just says he didn't see anything and everyone moves on. At this point, my immersion is ruined beyond any possible redemption. Here's a quick story. When I was 9 years old, we had this after-school program, and I left my Pokemon cards laying out on the floor while I went outside to play. When I came back in to get my stuff after my parents came, a couple of my rare cards were missing, and I freaked the fuck out. I questioned everyone, especially this one kid who had previously taken an interest in my cards. He says he didn't take them, but I don't believe that shit for a second, and as I'm about to leave with my parents, I jump the guy and reach my hands into his pockets. What do I find except one of my missing cards? Obviously, my parents were embarrassed with me, so we leave, but I never got all my cards back. Dude, if you're watching this, I want my Zapdos EX back. I told that story because at 9 years old, I distrusted people more than this guy, and maybe it's because I live in America and he lives in Japan, but especially if you have a reason to distrust them, you shouldn't give up this easily. Anyways, the gang split up to go collect some food, and just as Nicholas has caught a rabbit, Amber comes bursting in out of nowhere, demanding the rabbit and taking it back as a pet. Listen, honey, you're still best girl, but this is possibly the stupidest shit I've ever seen. Literally all of our food was stolen 30 minutes ago, and now you're taking a pet? You are not allowed to criticize Cynthia for having a stuffed bear as a friend if you're gonna go and pull this shit. Nicholas goes and collects some forest delicacies such as flower and worm, and eventually everyone meets gets back up at home. Franco volunteers to cook dinner because he's the only person with actual skills here, while Nicholas wastes precious food feeding the dinner that Amber's holding captive. Scratch that, it's not a waste. Nicholas got in Amber's room for the first time. Huge W, my boy. Huge W. Good shit, my man. Huge W. Let's go! The gang eventually have dinner, and afterwards Nicholas asks the girls if that bracelet he found on the beach earlier is one of theirs. Wow, not asking the guys. Kinda sexist of you, Nicholas. Twitter, get this man. None of them claim it. Janet and Cynthia have a sleepover and prank Nicholas like a bunch of assholes. Franco's building a boat, and that's about it. What the fuck are you doing in my room? Amber apparently snuck into our room to search for the bracelet, refusing to tell us why she wants it and just whining that she wants it back. Nicholas refuses because he can't decide if he's a simp or a Chad, and Amber leaves, but not 5 seconds later she starts just singing out of her window. I don't know what this scene means. Why is she singing after being refused the bracelet? What is this supposed to tell me? You do see a creepy person lurking around the house while watching her, who Nicholas just ignores, so my best guess is that this entire scene is just a really elaborate way to show the player that someone is watching us. It's so forced though, and it's really jarring for Amber's character. You'd think she'd be in her room pissed at Nicholas, but nope, just singing away. Maybe I don't understand women as well as I thought I did. Day 5 starts with Nicholas experiencing sleep paralysis and seeing evil Janet for the first time. This is not as scary as the developer thinks it is. You wake up and for some reason decide to flush the glass you broke down the sink, which is just mind-numbingly stupid. Just put it in the trash can, man. He sees Janet leaving the house alone and follows her, sensing an opportunity to live out his hentai fantasies. You have an attempt at a wholesome conversation that really just boils down to this clip. I used to be part of the school swimming club. I was very good at what I did, but at some point I stopped enjoying it. I only kept on doing it because it felt I was meant for that, or so I was told by others. You're not that good. What the hell, Nicholas? Afterwards, you head home and are forced into a fishing minigame by Franco and Sebastian. The minigame isn't too terrible, although I doubt Nicholas would actually be this good at fishing, and then when you're finished, you give Franco a turn and go talk to Sebastian. Sebastian reveals that Franco is actually a nice guy, which the player already knew, but Nicholas needed to catch up. So, Franco gets fucked by a shark, so he stops fishing, and the three of you then engage in some real manly shit. Underage drinking. Just kidding, it's apple juice, although Sebastian does genuinely get drunk off it, so that's unconfirmed. I'd talk more about this scene, but these two characters are kinda irrelevant, so back to the cabin. When you get back, Janet bitches at you to go visit Cynthia who's sick, and then Amber bitches at you to give her back the bracelet. I feel like my dad right now. What is this, marriage simulator? Cynthia's tweaking the hell out on shrooms and seeing shit, and Nicholas doesn't give a fuck and just leaves. He goes back to his room to just lay down and chill out, but Amber knocks on his door and tries to fuck him for the bracelet. Guys, this game has just completely devolved into chaos. I am totally lost. Please subscribe to the channel. This scene has me more confused than the plot of Evangelion. Why is Amber doing this? My waifu would never do this. She's a good woman. For real though, Amber skipping having a discussion and going straight to sexual favors makes no sense. She says she read in a book that men like this, and that's why she's doing it, but no rational person thinks like that. One of my friends told me that this is a hentai trope, so we'll just roll with that. My first thought was that she was abused as a child, so thinks this is normal, but the explanation we get is that she doesn't have a lot of friends, so she doesn't know how to navigate social situations. Actually, okay, this reasoning definitely felt dumb in the moment, but now that I'm looking back on it, I realize that it's not entirely impossible. If a person isolates themselves as much as Amber does, then they start to lose touch with reality and are much more susceptible to believing what the media says it is. Now, blaming the media is a very American thing to do, so if I take a seat back and realize that this game is probably based in Japanese culture, then it seems much more likely that this type of worldview was curated through anime, manga, hentai, and that sort of thing. This I definitely find believable, and Amber saying that she read men like this just lends more credence to the theory. So I've managed to convince myself that this interaction is possible, although it's probably not what the developer had in mind. So now my real issue with the scene is how little it impacts the rest of the story. This is a huge character development for Amber. Well-adjusted people don't do these things, but after Nicholas's initial what the fuck moment, what Amber did is smoothly brushed aside. If there was ever a moment to get Nicholas to really worry about Amber, this is it. But right when all the momentum for a dramatic conversation is built, the game just takes it nowhere. So all in all, it feels like this is some weird fetish thing that really didn't need to be in the story. After you reject Amber because this game's cringe and doesn't let you fuck a 15-year-old and every option leads to no fucking, she tells you that the bracelet is Valerie's and that Valerie took her in when she was young. Cool, the mystery builds and shit. Let's go take a shower to reflect. Oh, fuck, evil Janet stabbed me. Ooh, no. Yeah, day 5 ends with a non-consensual Janet stabbing in case she's probably British, and a flashback explaining the accident that caused Nicholas's coma. Hey, at least the game's consistent in not understanding how amnesia works. Oh, you want me to back up my claim that this representation of amnesia is wrong? Well, maybe if you subscribe to the channel, I'll consider it. The closest thing I could find to this game's version of amnesia would be localized dissociative amnesia, which is memory loss that only blots out certain events or periods, such as forgetting getting robbed at gunpoint but remembering the rest of the day. However, most cases of dissociative amnesia are relatively short, and if Nicholas had this localized version, he probably wouldn't have forgotten his friends or girlfriends. See, I told you he's just coping. The main problem this game has with amnesia is that it puts all types of amnesia under one blanket term and uses all of them on Nicholas. Essentially, he has all the Infinity Stones of amnesia, which doesn't make any sense. That said, I did say I'd give this game a pass because no game knows how amnesia works. I just wanted to prove I could do research on things. Basically, Nicholas pushed a girl out of the way of a car and got hit instead. Day 6 starts with Nicholas having an actually realistically short episode of localized dissociative amnesia and then reflecting on his past actions that I've already called out. This is probably the best chunk of writing in the game, but because of Nicholas's polarized character, I can't entirely get behind his self-assessment. While playing, I pretty much ignored this chunk and focused on the bit of dialogue right afterwards where he says he's gonna go warn everyone. I was super confused why he hadn't already done this after seeing that creepy person while Amber was singing, and I was so busy yelling at him that I pretty much scrubbed the previous dialogue from my head for the rest of the playthrough. Even if I can't fully get behind it, I can recognize that there's some decent dialogue in this game. It's just buried under a mountain of confusion and poor English. Anyways, you leave your room and start to warn Janet, but get distracted by the smell of, burning rabbit? Oh, fuck. With perfect dramatic timing, Amber comes downstairs and gets to see her furry little friend absolutely fucking obliterated. Naturally, she has a complete mental breakdown, runs out into the woods, and when Nicholas chases after her, she sneak attacks him with a fucking log and knocks him unconscious. This, for some inexplicable reason, causes a Cynthia flashback with info Nicholas couldn't have possibly known. My best guess is that this flashback is for the player, but it's implemented so weirdly, I guess I should stop holding out hope for this game, huh? You find Cynthia out alone in the woods and ask her if she knows where Amber went. She tells you that Amber went to that decrepit cabin you found earlier during the Test of Courage game, but that she also accused Cynthia of killing her rabbit. Nicholas gets super pissed when Cynthia says she didn't say anything back, and to teach her how to defend herself, he jumps on her fucking watermelon, completely destroying it. She pushes him off and he's all smug, like, yeah, she learned her lesson, and good lord, man, at this point, you're just an asshole. Back at the cabin, the game starts throwing out a bunch of bullshit that makes no sense to try and trick you into thinking that Janet is evil. I'll spoil it right now, she isn't evil, but for some reason she doesn't tell anyone about what happened to Nicholas and starts talking super strangely.
I genuinely can't remember the reasoning the game gave for why Janet doesn't warn anyone about Nicholas getting attacked, but if I had to guess, it was probably some bullshit the developers spewed out their ass just to make Janet a red herring, because there was literally no way the game could reasonably explain why Janet wouldn't tell anyone about his attack. Janet is constantly shown to be competent and caring, and it's just totally out of her character not to warn anyone. I mean, my best guess is that she didn't want anyone to know about evil Janet, but at this point, Nicholas hadn't even told her about evil Janet, so I just...
Anyways, you find out Janet has a personality disorder and is depressed, then you head on out to find Amber in the decrepit cabin. She whines a whole bunch, which is fair, and refuses to go back to the cabin with you, which is dumb, but also kind of fair. You do some bonding, I predict her pissing her pants.
No you don't, actually. Well, the piss is gonna come out anyways. Dude, it's so goddamn predictable, it's not even funny.
She asks you not to leave her alone, and then you fall asleep. Day 7 starts with you leaving Amber alone and some more red herring bullshit back with the gang. After escaping, you head back to the decrepit cabin and Amber is gone, however she is replaced with the evil version of inferior girl who attacks you in what is probably the coolest scene in the game. After escaping, you find all the lost food held up in the creepy cave and run into Franco on the beach. First of all, why you're on the beach and walking this way geographically makes no sense. Second of all, this is the part where Franco uses his psychic powers to follow through on his old promise and beat the shit out of you for being an asshole. How he knew about me and Amber, I don't know. Maybe Amber could have told him, but she was super fucked up mentally, so I don't quite buy it. Anyways, you beat his ass using anime protagonist powers and then get a vision of Amber committing suicide. Good luck with this part. I seriously cannot even begin to understand it. Okay, so the first time you go to the cliff, Amber turns into evil Janet and chases you. You head back to the cabin and lay down, where you get another premonition of Amber committing suicide, except this time there is creepy singing and a jump scare. You go to the cliff again, unless you fall for the game's trickery and didn't take Janet's aspirin, except this time Amber is actually there. She actually isn't there to commit suicide, but after you guys chat for a bit, another tremor happens and she slips off the edge. It is a total crapshoot which choice saves her here, and if you don't, Janet appears out of nowhere and murders Nicholas. If you do save her, a fucking hell demon blob appears out of nowhere and you're only saved by Franco being an absolute Chad. If you haven't caught on to the trend yet, if when you got the option to knock Franco out on the beach you actually chose it, then you'd be fucking dead now. Actually, in this case, you're the only one who lives.
No, dude. No way, Janet just walks on like fucking Kanye and jumps off the cliff. No way. No!
This game's multiple endings really just boils down to 2 endings and a bunch of random deaths that the dev thought looked cool. Anyways, on the walk back to the cabin, you see lightning strike it, and Nicholas starts hauling ass to try and save the people inside. Luckily for him, Valerie Ex Machina came out of nowhere and saved everyone. Nicholas starts exposing her for having taken Cynthia's bear and just generally being a terrible supervisor, which leads to yet another dumbass choice that causes a cool death. You have literally no reason to trust Valerie here, but you have to just ignore your feelings and blindly be the nice guy, because if you follow your gut, well, that's the end of that. Nicholas chooses to trust her, and him and the important characters follow her back to a safe location. While they're doing that, we get a cut to Franco's perspective, where he gets saved by Cynthia because we jumped on her melon, and she then had the confidence to stand up against a demon from hell because of it. Valerie shows all the important characters a secret trapdoor in the decrepit cabin, which, can I just say, it's an absolute miracle we never tripped on this carpet when doing, say, this, or this, but whatever. Amber starts to shed her tsundere skin and we head down to Valerie's secret laboratory. Now, depending on the choices you've made, this is either a very confusing dead end or a pit stop on the way to the real endings, which are also very confusing. If you didn't get Sebastian to like you, then here he goes completely insane and starts torturing Valerie. No joke, he goes full anime villain. He even calls Valerie a whore, which makes no sense because he's idolized her this entire time. Anyways, the explanation Sebastian gives for doing this is genuinely one of the worst moments of the game.
While I unfortunately can't share with you the exact same pain I felt, I can at least let the scene speak for itself.
9,7,199,254,675,456.
Huh?
Do you want to know what that number means? No, I'll tell you anyway. The number I just pointed is the number of times we have died according to my calculations.
The ending you get after all your hours of playing is a bullshit fourth wall break meta ending where everyone dies meaningless deaths because Sebastian went insane without his compass. The player leaves feeling like their time accomplished nothing, and this is one of the worst feelings you can give your players. I believe the devs said they were working on reworking how choices impact the endings, but when I played, in order to change this ending, I had to replay almost the entire game. It's made even more frustrating that while you're chained up, you can spam buttons to make numbers appear on screen, which makes it seem like you can escape. I replayed this scene quite a few times trying to do just that, but then I asked the dev in an email and they confirmed that you can't actually escape. I really don't understand why this is here, it just made me waste even more time with false hope. This whole segment is just really confusing, and I feel like it was just an excuse for the dev to make another cool death scene. Okay, but let's say you did get Sebastian to like you. What are the 2 actual endings like? Well, the first thing you get is an explanation for everything that's happened, and it is awful. They try to explain paranormal happenings with science, and it's just an absolute disaster. The explanation for that blob demon that kills you multiple times, for example, is that it, and I quote, is an autonomous thought form created by your distressed subconscious mind. Basically, what the game is seriously gonna go with here is that the big bad monster was created because we believed it exists. They also just throw in that it's made out of actual matter, but they don't bother to explain that part, so they've only 50% explained their monster, and now I'm even more confused. In addition, the explanation for why you're on the island in the first place is that you were unknowingly a part of this massive company called Ceton's experiment. Ceton is the company run by Cynthia's dad, and what they based their test off of was some bullshit theory that different emotional energies and vibrations can affect the physical structure of water. They tested it and found that those energies and vibrations actually actually affect all matter alike to some degree. So essentially, you are being emotionally manipulated without your consent in order to test if talking nice to plants makes them grow better. Sometimes, it's best to leave things unexplained. I realize I'm oversimplifying parts of this, but regardless, the point stands that the developer only half tries to explain everything. For example, when Nicholas asks how we could see into the future, Valerie suggests that it could be him peering into an alternate reality, but when asked how that would work, she literally just says, "I couldn't tell," and concludes with, "It's a mysterious world."
If you're gonna attempt to explain all the paranormal bullshit, then you gotta at least go all the way through with it. Otherwise, you're just limiting what the player's imagination can do. If you don't have a really good explanation thought up, then you should leave it to the player to come up with one, because chances are they'll come up with something better and more satisfying in their head than you ever could.
The game actually does this when you ask about the dog, and that's one of my favorite parts of the game because it allowed me to freak myself out with unconfirmed ideas. Games are meant to be interactive anyways, and allowing the player to participate in creating the game's story is a good way to engage them with your game. Anyways, moving on from that, Valerie slaps the shit out of Amber and we get some more backstory for her. Basically, Amber's mom got sick, the dad worked for Seton and asked them to fund his research looking for a cure. They refused, he did it anyways, wife died, they fired him, he got depressed and killed himself. Clearly, Amber's a little fucked up, and we can confirm this as she refers to her dad's death as him being disposed of. What the fuck? Seton felt bad and carried on his research, finding a cure and then constantly monitoring Amber since she has the same sickness as her mom. Hey, we're improving! That was only like 50% predictable. Good shit, developer. Actually, on that note, when I was talking to the developer, they mentioned that this game was inspired heavily by Never 7. I'd never heard of it, so I went and read the Wikipedia page, and after doing so, I honestly didn't know what to think. From what I can tell, Miraculo Island is an extremely similar game to Never 7, which makes sense because it was originally a fan game. I mean, they aren't the same game, Miraculo Island's presentation is very different, and I doubt the plot is a one-to-one copy. I'm just mentioning that I noticed a peculiar amount of similarities. Again, this makes sense because it was originally a fan game, but following so closely the basic plot and ideas of another game could be the reason why a lot of the writing comes off as strange and unfocused. Alright, we gotta wrap this shit up, my voice is dying. Another tremor happens and the gang flees the complex through an infinitely long tunnel. Janet's evil clone appears behind us, but nobody but Janet notices. She smokes some dumbass bitch juice and decides to stop to take it on alone, which obviously Nicholas, being the protagonist, isn't keen to let her do. So Nicky Boy very nonchalantly walks up in front of Janet and lets himself get stabbed without even trying to fight. Hey man, I know you're trying to be dramatic and all, but you don't have to flex your plot immunity that hard. Janet doesn't even check to see if she could save him, which, I mean, she doesn't need to, he's got plot armor, but it would have been nice, I don't know. The explanation we get for evil Janet is that Janet herself actually did want Nicholas dead. If you hadn't guessed it yet, she's the one Nicholas saved when he got hit by a car. When he saved her, she was super depressed, but seeing someone else sacrifice themselves for her gave her a renewed appreciation for life. When she found out he was actually alive, she felt as though her reason had kind of gone away, and so wished that he would simply die. Evil Janet is a manifestation of this desire, which isn't quite how the game explained how this whole thing worked earlier, but it's close enough. While her reasoning seems dumb to me, I actually like it because I can understand her perspective. It's not something I could ever imagine thinking, but it seems realistic enough, and getting a new perspective on life is a really important part of media in my opinion.
This is the one part of the game that I think really benefits from having a final explanation. It adds a lot to both of their characters, and it's a fun little twist that some people, not me of course, might have not seen coming.
Also, the way Nicholas survived the scissors is pretty dumb. He used his manga as a shield and just got lucky that evil Janet didn't hit him anywhere they weren't, but whatever, it's kind of funny and ties back into earlier plot points. When they get out of the caves, everyone is gone, which means they're obviously gonna get chased by evil wait a minute. And we finally get the long-awaited chase sequence. It's a pretty cool sequence and you can't game over, which is nice, but it's probably the worst sequence in a game I've ever seen because I'm bad at it. You meet up with everyone at the lighthouse. I can't remember how you knew they'd be there, but I'm gonna just assume it was explained, and plan to wait for your transport to arrive so you can get off the island. Unfortunately, there's a big-ass seismic wave that the gang gets wind of, and you have to make a choice. Either go to the highest point on the island or use the boat Franco's been working on to escape. Hey, look at that! Franco's whole thing about loving the ocean that I never explained actually became relevant to the plot. That's some good writing, what the heck? Valerie gives the cliched final speech that we've all graduated the program and we're fully back into society and that she's so proud of us. Shut up, bitch. She lets everyone vote on what they're gonna do. Now, if it was me, I'd hop on the boat regardless of the majority ruling and fuck right off, but these characters are all unrealistic, so they, as young adults mind you, remain calm in this life or death situation. As you can guess, the ending comes down to you, and from here I gotta split into two chunks and discuss both endings separately. I'm calling this ending one because I picked it first. You vote to trust Franco and the gang gets ready to sail into a seismic wave. I don't know how this works, don't question it. Actually, instead of helping out and hauling ass, Nicholas and the girls just fuck around and talk about their emotions. For the love of all things holy, please, for once in this game, don't act like mental patients. Everybody makes up and you hop on the boat, except this game must have been made by a Twitch streamer because instead of just ending, it stalls with some more bullshit. Apparently, and I'm gonna blame it on the people talking about their feelings, not one person noticed that the boat was still attached by a rope on shore. Nicholas tries to cut the rope, but the game really doesn't want to die, so he drops the knife in the water. Then, for all the game stalling, it just has the rope get magically cut by something and then they're all saved. Cool. There's an after credits scene in this ending that uses a different art style, by the way, where you're working for Cynthia after she takes over Seton, which feels a little strange. If there's multiple after credits scenes, then I guess it's fine, but at least in my playthrough, I found Cynthia to be pretty irrelevant. Most of the main story is focused on Amber and Janet, and more often than not, Cynthia kind of feels like an afterthought. I'd kinda get it if the dev was going for an on-the-side Cynthia romance type thing, but we only get one sorta statement that barely hints at Cynthia maybe liking Nicholas. A romance with Janet would make a lot more sense. I mean, there's a ton more hints that she likes Nicholas. Hell, even Amber would make more sense. I just don't get why it's only Nicholas and Cynthia. At least have the other characters around, it'd make sense that they're friends after all they've been through. I don't know, maybe I'm just pissed at my wife who didn't get picked. Yeah, that's exactly it. I mean, come on, you picked a frickin' loli, what's wrong with you? So this seems like a pretty decent ending, right? Everyone lived, and, everyone lived. But actually, this isn't the true ending. Nope, the dev wanted to be artsy with their ending, so instead of this mildly satisfying one, we get the absolute shitmungus you're about to witness. In ending 2, you decide to trust Valerie and head for higher ground. On the way, Cynthia, Franco, and Sebastian all fucking die, but apparently this is a Disney game, so Nicholas just tells Valerie that they took a detour. What the fuck? You guys don't give a shit though, so you keep moving higher. When you're almost at the top, Amber's previously hurt leg comes in clutch and completely fucks her over. I'm not sure what a hydrant is, but Amber definitely is after letting herself die over a little leg pain. I thought my waifu was better than this. You and Janet make it to the top. She finally uses that ask you to do anything card she won at the pond to make Nicholas hold her hand, and then you fucking die. Yeah, true ending, woohoo, yeah. I realize you were probably expecting a cut to a scream, and that's coming, don't worry, but there's a couple of things I wanted to talk about before I share my mental breakdown over the ending. By the way, I'm pulling an all-nighter to finish this segment, so don't sue me if editing gets so fucky. I'm really fucking tired, man. Miraculo Island had quite a bit of potential, and save for the story, I think the game was actually pretty good. Besides the genuinely shocking amount of performance issues for an RPG Maker game, Miraculo Island is pretty well put together. The mini-games are fun, unique, and technologically impressive considering the engine they were made in. The mapping is pretty well done too, there's never really any dead space, and the lighting and tile work makes the game at the very least pleasant to look at. The cutscenes, for the most part, have nice sprite work and movement to keep the player engaged. Sometimes the sprite work gets covered by the character portraits, which makes me question if the game was playtested, but they do look nice though. The character portraits are well drawn, not gratuitous, and they do a great job of immediately conveying the cliche the character is. All in all, if they fix the absolutely horrendous lag, the game is on the higher end of RPG Maker visuals and gameplay. However, seeing as it is mostly a visual novel, the entire game rests on the quality of its writing. No matter how good the small gameplay segments are or how beautiful the game is, in a visual novel, the story has to be excellent. Unfortunately, writing seems to be the one thing Iliad Works really struggles with and will be the focus of this segment. I mentioned that the game has a really big problem with lag, and actually that exact same problem exists within the writing. It seems like every other dialogue box a character is stuttering, or lagging, to start their sentence, which is really, really annoying. Not
Not everyone stutters, in fact most people don't, and just using it as dramatic fluff for tense situations is really grating. Over winter break, I started my collection of the Spice and Wolf light novels, and I noticed this type of stuttering present in its writing too.
So my best guess then, and I'm totally just pulling this out of my ass here, is that this type of stuttering, onomatopoeia, whatever you want to call it, type writing is more common in Japanese literature, and the developer just went, oh, this looks cool, might now put it in their work without really understanding what makes it work. In Spice and Wolf, and you're gonna just have to trust me bro on this one, the characters don't constantly stutter, even in tense situations, say in book 3, when Amadi and Lawrence are negotiating a business deal with one another that could result in either of their complete financial ruin. They're not stuttering during the negotiations because they are literally professional merchants. It's their job not to stutter. However, these same two characters who don't stutter at all when talking business have a complete stuttering breakdown when talking to the sexy 15-year-old wolf. And then talking about that 15-year-old wolf, I can say that she hardly ever stutters, maybe like 3 times, because it's just not in her character. The stuttering in Spice and Wolf is always just enough to help the reader who can't see their facial expressions like they could if it was a video game to understand how the characters are feeling. It's still exaggerated beyond reality, but only enough to help the reader get immersed in this fantastical setting. Although it sounds counterintuitive, in my opinion, it's really difficult to get a player to suspend their disbelief and believe a fantasy setting to be real if there's not a heightened sense of reality or exaggeration.
However, Miraculo Island goes well beyond reasonable exaggeration and just makes a complete joke out of stuttering. It lost its effect entirely and I began to just ignore it. If it was just Sebastian who stuttered or it was done more modestly, I think the stuttering would have been a solid addition.
As it stands, it's awful.
This isn't actually the main issue with the writing, though. The main problems are what you might already be thinking, the grammar and the cliches. There are countless interactions in the game that feel like they were ripped straight out of 100 other anime, but with a horrifying twist. What it felt like this game did was take already exaggerated anime characters and interactions and then exaggerate them further. Doing this, the exaggerated writing became less interesting and engaging and more comical. Combine that with already cliché dialogue and a poor grasp on the English language, and I found myself laughing at the game more than I was genuinely invested in it.
I mean, for the most part, this video was just a jokey summary of the game, not a detailed breakdown and analysis.
Except for right now. It's time to delve into Nicholas. First of all, after Valerie leaves, Nicholas and Janet basically become pseudo-leaders of the group, which doesn't make any sense. I mean, the Janet part does, but Nicholas is a weeaboo shut-in with no friends who just got out of a coma a year ago and is suffering from amnesia. Him being a leader whose main thing is chasing after Amber and looking out for her makes less sense than this game's trailer. It would make way more sense for Franco to be the pseudo-leader. He is constantly shown to care about those around him. He has actual skills, and he definitely has more confidence than the guy with amnesia. But nope, instead he just acts like an idiot to make Nicholas look better, except for when the game needs him to be a sort of mentor type for Nicholas. Actually, there's quite a few scenes like this where a character just acts completely bizarre to make Nicholas look better. While this isn't extremely frequent, what is frequent is how every character seems to be dependent on Nicholas. Other than this scene with Valerie and Amber, I can't think of a single time where a character changes without Nicholas's permission, which makes for some really weird character development. This is especially a problem since, considering everything we know about Nicholas, he should be the one everybody else is looking out for, not the other way around. That last sentence holds the entirety of Nicholas's problems. His personality is completely inconsistent. I can sorta generally see the growth the dev was going for. It's a sort of zero to hero story, but Nicholas has sporadic moments of being the hero even at the start. I mean, he's first presented as a shut-in weeaboo, but does things I'm sure the majority of that type would never do.
I get that in some stories like this, the character starts off with good traits and just has to refine them through hard work, but Nicholas already seems pretty refined.
Basically, it seems like Nicholas has bipolar disorder. Sometimes he's funny, dorky, and completely stupid, and other times he is confident, composed, and a real alpha male. I guess, in other words, he's the perfect guy. Now, entertainment media isn't always about showing realistic characters, but even if the character is meant to be near perfect, characters that don't undergo some amount of growth or change don't engage people. People like conflict, drama, struggle, characters succeeding against all odds, and even in power trip fantasies where the struggle is lessened, if the protagonist never encounters some hurdle, people will will get bored. If Nicholas is already the perfect guy, then that takes away a lot of our reason for playing the game. You might initially think you're just playing for the mystery, and that may be what draws you in, but experiencing Nicholas's growth along with the worsening conditions is a big part of the story too. You need to sort of be able to see yourself in his shoes. Imagine someone saying they read Berserk only for the monster killing and not for the characters. Like, no, if Guts and Griffith weren't who they were, Berserk wouldn't be the masterpiece that it is.
Guts' growth reflects the reader's growth. They grow together as the story goes on, and this keeps the reader engaged. There's a reason so many people say Berserk changed me. The reader may have first picked it up because they wanted some badass action or some really fucking incredible artwork, but they definitely, and I'll bet my channel on this, stayed for the characters.
Nicholas is the polar opposite to Guts. He isn't a struggler. Nicholas has no grand hurdle to overcome, or at least not a hurdle that requires him to change. You might point to when Nicholas is stabbed and starts taking things more seriously as experiencing a change and overcoming a hurdle, but does his writing really change to reflect this? To me, he's just written as the same old Nicholas. He never stops being funny and nerdy, and he never gets more confident and composed than he's shown to be in the beginning.
He really just feels like a self-insert character so the developer can live out their fantasy.
Think about it. A nerdy weeaboo loser gets the girls and becomes a confident hero people can rely on. I'm not saying writing characters like this is always a bad thing, but in this case, it gets pretty painful. Actually, I take back what I said. Nicholas never becomes someone people can rely on. In the neutral ending, he fucks up and drops the knife in the water, and he screws around talking to the girls instead of helping Franco get ready and possibly noticing that still tied rope. These are mistakes Nicholas from day one would have made, and while it may be unrealistic to think he'd change much in 8 days, sometimes growth needs to be exaggerated for the sake of giving your story a point. There is one more thing I need to touch on before discussing the ending, and that's the other characters. Way back at the start of this video, I wondered if the game would be able to develop all of them. Well, as was foreshadowed, it did not. Considering the game is at most 10 hours long, it had to focus on only a few characters or risk the player not caring about anyone. While this was the right choice, this whole issue is a self-inflicted problem that didn't need to exist. The characters the game focuses on are Amber, Janet, and Nicholas. Everyone else just kind of fades into the background. It isn't like the game didn't try to develop the other characters, it's just that they become so irrelevant in the grand scheme of things that they could be replaced by 4 totally different characters and not much would change. They do matter within their respective side plots, but these aren't interesting enough for them to really matter. Amber and Janet are, on the other hand, literally the main story. Up until the god-awful ending that killed my dog, figuring out Janet and Amber is the main thing you're doing. Along with yourself, they are the two most affected by the mystery of the island, Amber being driven to near suicide and Janet literally having an evil version of herself that's trying to kill you. The plot is based around trying to help and understand the two of them until it isn't. If we cut out the ending, changing Amber and Janet would change the entire game. To me, a good character is either one a story can't do without or one that provides memorable moments. Since every moment is mostly a cliche you've seen before, Sebastian, Franco, Cynthia, and Valerie are neither of those things.
Alright, it's time to talk about the ending. Cut to that scream I promised.
Oh my god! Can I just start with what the fuck? I don't know if it's just me, but I hate this ending.
Even if it's more dramatic or through some cryptic bullshit ties back into the game's themes, it's ultimately extremely unsatisfying. Not every story needs a happy ending, but every story needs a satisfying one. That's what makes it a story and not just real life. Endings where the characters die aren't always bad, and being more symbolic with your writing is totally fine too, but it needs to have a purpose. I don't hate this ending because of what happens, but because in this story specifically, it serves no purpose. What does the player gain by the characters dying? What lesson is taught? What idea is revealed? What is the purpose? You might argue that not everything needs to have a purpose, and I would agree, but big things do. Having, say, a funny moment with a duck doesn't need to impact the character's decisions for the rest of their life. There are moments in real life too that add nothing to our lives but to be entertaining. However, to again reflect real life, stories need to have big moments that fundamentally change either the character or the player. Usually it's both together, but separate works too. The death of the main character, for example, should be a massive event that changes or even just affects the player in some way. The death of Nicholas and everyone else in Miraculo Island did not affect me at all, unless we're talking about making me extremely confused. The true ending adds nothing to the rest of my playtime and only adds more mystery and confusion to what is otherwise a fully explained game, no matter how bad I think that explanation is. Also, as a side note, in my email correspondence with the developer, they had this to say about the true end. The other one is the more canonical ending, where everybody goes down together in a more or less satisfying way, and you stay in the loop, trapped forever, basically because you refuse to let go of those days. That last part makes me think that they have a completely different idea of what the game is than I do.
I did not get the impression that Nicholas loved his time on the island enough to get trapped in an infinite loop of death just to stay. Also, apparently Sebastian's mad ramblings about being stuck in an infinite time loop is real and canon, which really throws me off because I thought he was just insane. This just confuses me 1,000 times more about the game's plot, and it means that all of the explaining in game still wasn't enough. So I'm gonna give up and just go with my original analysis that it's a dogshit ending that seems more like a bad end than a true one. It's up there with some of the greats of the bad ending industry, and I guess if anything, that's the greatest accomplishment this game had.
At the end of the day, Miraculo Island is a game for nobody. It's not funny enough to be a good time waster or a so bad it's good game. It isn't consistently well written, so you can't take it seriously. It's not sexy enough to be a porn game, and it's not family friendly enough to be for dumb kids. Who is this game for? I think that if the developer can answer that question and design the game around it, Miraculo Island has a shot. I had some good times, they just weren't frequent enough for me to recommend it. Like the title says, it's the best bad RPG Maker game because it's the only one I can remember that has any chance at redemption. I can see a decent game buried under layers of it being officially their first project and originally being a fan game and the poor translation and the bad optimization and the Okay, so there's quite a lot stopping it from being decent, not to mention the $10 price tag, but that's my whole point. It has the idea of a good game, just an extremely poor execution.
The reason I don't think you should play it, though, is even simpler than all of that. Ignore the price tag and ignore the poor execution. When all is said and done, it just isn't interesting.
I've seen all of this before, and if you haven't, then you've been living under a rock. The only people who are really gonna play this game are people who don't know a lot about the genre, which we can see in the top review.
That's fine, but it limits the audience quite a lot.
On top of that, it also doesn't really stand out from other games like it. So because of that, and because on top of that the writing is bad and performance awful, I doubt there's a future for this game right now.
It isn't some hidden gem waiting to be discovered, and even if it was, the Steam page would turn away many prospective players. It is the perfect example of a truly mediocre RPG Maker game in the eyes of the mainstream, or in other words, it's the best bad RPG Maker game you shouldn't play. Alright, well, said the title. Video's over, boys. Oh, and remember to subscribe and like the video and hit the send me money and thanks for watching. This took a lot of time and I appreciate it.
Keep your heart open and change will come. Keep your heart open and change will come.